Welcome back. Today we're going to go over problem solving with scale drawings. So in this one we have several things that we'll need to go through, but it's just kind of a review of what we've been doing. But first off, we have the area and the perimeter are impacted by the change in dimensions. So if we change the dimensions of this picture here, that's going to change the distance that the perimeter is, and it's also going to change the area that the space takes up. So if I have this first one, it says the PTA they created a back-to-school backdrop and they snapped Polaroid pictures. The Polaroid pictures measure 3 inches by 4 inches, as shown in this picture here. They determined that the scale is 1 inch equals 1.5 feet. So what are the dimensions of the actual backdrop? So if I look at the actual backdrop here and I use that scale, the very first thing that I do is I set up a proportion. And with that proportion, I go ahead and say that I have 1 inch equals 1.5 feet. I could have done it the other way as well, where the 1.5 feet was on top. It's just whatever I have on top here, it needs to stay on top on the second one. So I have inches here, the second one needs to be inches. I could have done it the other way though and had feet and feet. I then take one of the dimensions and I set it up. So if I take this first one, I took 3, and 3 inches, that's the base that I'm looking for, so I'm going to use the variable b. And then with that one, I just go ahead and cross multiply by timesing the diagonal numbers, 1.5 times 3, and then I divide by the leftover, which is 1. So 1.5 times 3 divided by 1, that means the base is going to be 4.5 feet. So this distance from here all the way across is 4.5 feet in the actual item. I do the same thing for the height. So I set up my proportion there, and then I go ahead and take the information and I use the same scale factor. 1 inch is 1.5 feet, and instead of putting the base, I put the height, and I have 4 inches. So I go do my cross product. That would be 4 times 1.5 divided by 1, which you should notice that this is identical to what we just barely did, but instead of using a 3, we used a 4. So instead of using a base, we used a height. That way when we cross multiply and divide, we get 6 feet. So how many square feet does the backdrop cover? Well, I just take my base and times it by my height. Base times height would be 27 feet squared. Now Ralph, he looked at the problem and he stated that the solution should be 18 square feet. And we need to explain why he's not correct. So first off, we should figure out how he got 18. And to look at this, if I were to get the dimensions of this actual thing right here, it would be 4 times 3, and that would be 12. And then if I were to multiply that by the scale factor, 1.5, 12 times 1.5 gives me 18. But what ends up happening is you can't multiply the area by the scale factor. You have to do an additional step. So what Ralph, he actually did is he multiplied the area by the scale factor, which is 12 times 1.5. But he should have multiplied each dimension, the base and the height, by the scale factor. Alright, so with that information, now we have a second problem. This floor plan, it's for a studio apartment and it measures 9 by 6 inches. The scale is listed on the floor plan as 2 inches equaling 7 feet. So for every 2 inches on the plan, that means that it's 7 feet long in real life. So we need to sketch a plan and then calculate the actual size of the apartment. So to start out, I'm just going to go ahead and use the floor plan for the 9 by 6, and I draw a little rectangle here, and I'm going to make it 9 by 6. So we have 9 inches for the base and 6 inches for the height. I can then determine the perimeter and area based off of that. The perimeter would just be adding up all the sides. So I go 9 plus 6, 9 plus 6, and I'm going to get 30 inches. The area, base times height, I'm going to go ahead and multiply 9 times 6 and get 54 inches squared. In order to go from the floor plan to the actual, we need to use the scale factor, which in this case, our scale factor again, we have 7 feet for every 2 inches, so we can go ahead and say 7 feet per 2 inches. On the other side, we just pick one of the numbers, so I'm going to choose the base, and the base here we would use 9 for the bottom. Now, why is the variable on top instead of on bottom? Because last time it was on bottom. Well, if we look over here, we have feet and inches. This should be feet. Does that 9 have feet next to it? It doesn't. So that means that the 9 has to go on bottom because that's where inches go. I then cross multiply and divide, and I get 9 times 7 divided by 2, which is 31.5 feet. Now, rather than setting up a brand new problem just like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this 9, and I'm going to rewrite this problem, but I'm going to write it for height, and replace that 9 with a 6. So I do that. Height equals 6 times 7 divided by 2, and that would give me a height of 21 feet. So now that I have my base and height, I can go ahead and draw my new rectangle. The base is 31.5 feet, and the height is 21 feet. And then with that information, I can now find the perimeter. But I noticed something with the perimeter on this one. It was just the same numbers repeated to get the perimeter. So I'm going to go ahead and use my base and my height, but instead of doing it twice, I'm just going to times it by 2. So when I go 31.5 plus 21 and times it by 2, I get 105 feet. Remember the area again, base times height. I go ahead and do 31.5 times 21, and I'm going to get a grand total of 661.5 square feet. Now, a really cool thing you might want to check, go ahead and take your calculator and divide, first off, divide 7 divided by 2, and then second, divide 105 by 30, and then third, divide 661.5 by 54. There's a really cool thing that happens with that, and we can talk more about that later, but hopefully this was helpful for you. And now what you need to do is you're going to go ahead and match up with a partner, and you're going to play your tic-tac-toe to answer the questions below. And do your very best to go through and answer each question so that way you guys can get a good review on this. Have a great day.